Call the police, he's trespassing." That's what she yelled the second my key turned the lock, like my own front door had decided I didn't belong anymore. Like grief had not only taken my dad, but also my name off the deed. Inside, candles, bells, 20 women in matching leggings circling my father's old fly rod, like it was a torch from Olympus. 2 guys with earpieces posted up like bodyguards, and at the center, a woman in a cream shawl with a smile that said she loved peace, while her eyes said she loved power. "Ladies, you're witnessing a disruption," she announced. "Security. Remove this hostile energy." And I held up my keys and said as calmly as I could, "Hostile energy is the owner. That's my dad's rod. The dented thermos. That boot rack." Of it, but she floated closer, smelling like sage and money, and said, "Under Northcrest. Township Wellness, Code 31-7C. This site is designated for community healing. Your prolonged absence triggered stewardship protocols, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. The place where sorrow turns into focus. So I hit record on my phone, tucked it to my jacket, and told her there was no universe where she sold tickets to touch my father's coffee mug. She looked past me like I was a speed bump and told the group, "Observe how wounded masculinity resists collective wisdom. And if you've ever stood invisible in your own house, you know exactly how that sounds." You know what I mean. I stepped onto the porch to breathe the pine air sharper than I remembered, and Ray Duncan's old pickup rolled in slow. Ray's a retired cop, with the kind of handshake that says he's seen things and stayed kind. Anyway, he glanced at the earpieces and the clipboards and said, "Cal, you picked a hell of a day then." In a low voice, he gave me the outline. A woman calling herself Harper showed up months ago saying she was in recovery, and needed community asked a lot of questions about you and the cabin and your dad. While the shawl lady, she called herself Madeline Pike, started hosting retreats, and somehow convinced the county it was legit. That night at Ray's kitchen table, I did what I do when my hands can't stop shaking. Opened my laptop and started pulling threads 10 minutes later. I had a glossy sight in my face. Evergreen Ascension retreats, photos of my living room staged like a cathedral. My dad's flannel labeled "Artifact of Ancestral Resilience," his mug tagged. Vessel of morning intention pricing that made me laugh into Ray's stale coffee and then stop laughing. 2 $400 for breathwork weekends. 30,000 for bloodline clearing intensives, and a calendar entry that hit me right between the eyes tomorrow. Celebrity Transformation Weekend with Jade Moreno. 80,000 followers. Film crew viral content. My father's spirit guidance packaged for views and sponsorships. Seth Adler. My lawyer called with his voice in that low gear. That means trouble. I pulled the wellness code, Cal. It's vapor. The commissioner's been signing spiritual permits with no legal base. 8 months of rubber stamps. Also, he owes a bookie 50 grand, which told me everything I needed to know about why fake documents had real stamps. And while Seth dug into the commissioner, I dug into the woman in the shawl. Madeline Pike wasn't real. She was Leona Voss, a therapist who lost her license in Arizona for exploiting grief clients, and Harper. The kind eyes and careful questions. Was her sister convicted for identity fraud in Oregon, and the pattern got loud all at once. Scan obituaries, find heirs who go quiet. Flood a small town with soft words and a smiling plant, then show up with paperwork and a tone that makes decency feel like consent. The next day, I didn't roll in. Swinging, I rolled in with a camera, and patience, the cabin looked like a boutique festival. pop-up tents, truffle oil from a catering truck, a folding table with name tags, the earpiece guys stationing themselves like the Secret Service. And then, Jade arrived in all black with that influencer glow that says she can pivot to anything and make it trend. Leona greeted her like a queen. The woodsman is honored to channel your transformation. Which is funny. If you've ever watched someone spin poetry to hide theft. And I posted up by the split-rail fence and kept recording bowls singing for cameras' breath counts. The lighting perfect, and Leona lifting my dad's fly rod like a microphone, promising to carry the voice of the North Woods through this sacred instrument. So I said softly, more to myself than to anyone, that Rod taught me not to hook my own ear. It's not your microphone. A crew guy set down a lanyard that said, "Press on a crate beside me," and that dumb idea flashed bright. Call it luck. Call it timing. I called Seth and said I needed a hall pass. A friend at the film office owed me a favor, and an hour later, I had a laminated badge that in the hustle and the heat looked real enough. I blended into the edges, carried a light stand, nodded at instructions, and kept the camera rolling. Between takes, the mask slipped. Leona told a cameraman, "Casual as weather. Best targets are heirs who disappear. You establish authority before they remember how to say no." And she wiped imaginary dust off my dad's thermos while she said it. And it hit me that criminals like to pretend morality's complicated, but they always drop crumbs. All you have to do is keep your hands steady long enough to gather them. I had her on audio, but I needed the fuse that would burn loud enough to reach every room she'd built. So I walked to Jade at the craft table. She was chewing a strawberry like it owed her money and scrolling messages with her thumb. "I'm Cal. This is my place." That rod was my dad's. Leona's real name is Voss. She lost her license. 2 states over, her sister. Harper is a plant. I have proof, and Jade didn't flinch because she's not naive. She's entrepreneurial. Proof sells. She said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Truth in my house back," and she smiled that small business smile and said, "Truth sells too." 5 minutes later, she went live to 80,000 people and said the sentence, "The internet treats like a starter pistol." I think I'm being scammed, and the comments lit up like a switchboard. License records. Harper's mugshot. The real county code. A state tax investigator chiming in about unlicensed commercial activity. A wildlife officer asking about film permits. The guards looking at each other like their day rate just got complicated, and Leona tried to yank the wheel back by yelling that I was violating a restraining order. Didn't even know existed, yeah? That happened, Seth. Rang in my pocket and said there was an emergency hearing in 2 hours, and if I didn't show, they'd make the lie stick like tar. Courthouse, small room. Big theater, the judge looked like a man who usually settled fence lines and fishing disputes, and now had to parse phrases like spiritual trespass. Leona walked in with a stack of papers, thick enough to choke a horse, and performed trauma like Broadway. Staged photos of me lurking neighbor statements that made me sound like a fuse ready to blow incident reports from her hired security. Every time I said, "This is my house," she said, "Community healing transcends possession." And for a second, I felt the floor tilt under my feet. He granted a temporary 500-foot order, and I tasted copper. And if you know what it's like to be the quiet one, people think they can move around like furniture. Then you know what? Rose up, right? Then that stubborn part that keeps casting even when the line snaps. I walked out. Called Seth. Called Ray. Called in my press credential. Hustled back to the set before sunset. and the live audience had turned into a crowd that wasn't buying incense and adjectives anymore. They were asking for receipts. The investigator messaged Seth to say a case was open and on a hot mic. Leona dropped the exact confession I needed. "Catch people before they stop crying," she said. "They'll trade anything for meaning." "If you hand them a story," and I sent the clip to Seth. The state and Jade played it into the lens and said, "Guys, you need to hear this." And the sound of a professional liar telling you the playbook is a strange kind of music. The Commissioner Ben Halper folded in 2 hours. It's amazing how fast a man finds courage when the live stream starts asking which official sold a fake permit. He called everyone and begged for immunity, spilled the gambling debt, the envelopes, the pressure, and Harper blew her own cover in the chaos. By flashing comms gear she forgot to hide, Ray walked up slow and said, "Harper, real name," and she deflated and told investigators everything. Obituaries air, lists, scripts in 3 dialects, spiritual, legal shame, and she handed over training decks that read like a manual for stealing grief and calling it community. Seizures came fast. Cameras, incense, stock, glossy pamphlets, and crates of crystals that went from holy to garage sale the minute the orange federal label stuck. The judge lifted my order, and I climbed my own porch, with keys that finally felt like keys. Again wiped strangers' fingerprints off my dad's rod and hung it where it belonged. Neighbors showed up with pies and apologies. I took them once and not twice, because we didn't need a parade, we needed a reset. And Ray flipped burgers while people signed a card that said, "We're sorry we believed a stranger over a neighbor," and I signed one back that said, "We're good." If the story ended there, you'd nod and move on. But 2 weeks later, Detective Mina Carter from Oregon called and said Leona wasn't the top. She was middle management. There were training decks circulating in private channels, a patron upstream funding copycats who target military families, widows, anyone with land and silence. And I wasn't surprised, because once you've seen the watermark, you start spotting it everywhere. So I did what tech guys do when we get knocked down and stand back up. I built True North Verify. Nothing flashy, but fast. Scan a practitioner's license. Pull disciplinary records. Cross-check venue ownership with ad claims. Ping state databases for permits. In seconds, we partnered with a funeral home because grief is a crowded room and the front door never locks. Ray and I ran trainings for small-town cops on how to investigate crimes that sound like feelings. We drafted a clean ordinance that anchors property rights. So tight, a good story can't pry them loose. And the first month, the tool flagged 62 bad actors. The second month, 103. And those numbers in the articles aren't statistics. They're kitchen tables, not being sold for content. Jade pivoted from glam wellness to a series called The Fixers and Fakers, and she is better at journalism than at content. If you ask me, Harper pled down and started telling the truth in rooms that needed it. The commissioner retired, and his replacement signed a transparency pledge. I wrote, and the cabin got quiet in a way that felt like breathing again. I poured 2 coffees, one for me and one for the silence, and thought maybe we were done. That's when Harper called, voice lower than I'd ever heard. "I'm keeping my head down, Cal, but I think someone found me. Not Leona. Bigger, the one she called the patron." And I stood at the window and watched the pines move, feeling that same cold click in my chest from the first day. Because there's always someone upstream banking the scripts, always a suit, who learned that sorrow is a market. So here's where I am. Grief tried to make me small. Leona bet on it. The system bet on it. But the day someone called me trespasser in my own home, the part my dad raised woke up the part that fixes a reel and keeps casting. I'm not a hero. I'm a stubborn son. And sometimes that's enough. And now it's your turn in the circle. Tell me in the comments, where do you draw the line between community and control? Have you seen an HOA or a healer or some shiny authority push past your rights because they counted on you being quiet? Who was right? Who was wrong? What would justice look like if we built it from the ground up, instead of letting someone sell it back to us for 30 grand a weekend? Like the video, if this flagged a red sign you might have missed. Share it with someone who's drowning in a story they didn't choose and subscribe. If you want the follow-up, because if the patron is real, and yeah, I think he is, we're not done.